The thread snapped between her teeth. Elara tasted copper blood from where the suture needle had slipped against her cracked lip. She knelt on the frozen earth behind the Ashfall compound's tanning shed. Her fingers were raw, shaking uncontrollably in the biting November wind. She was stitching the last seam of something that would either save her life or end it before sunrise. The heavy fabric beneath her bruised hands was not normal cloth. It was the battle standard of the Winter Claw Kingdom. It had been torn from its pole during the skirmish 3 days ago, left tangled in the eastern razor wire. It smelled of smoke and old war. But beneath the metallic tang of gunpowder, there was something else. Winter pine, crushed ferns, and a deep, resonant warmth that made her wolf, silent and suppressed for 6 long years, stir faintly in her chest. She had pulled the flag from the wire. The silver direwolf crest was split down the center, shredded by artillery, but it was whole enough to read, whole enough to wear. Elara pulled the crude dress over her head. The military-grade wool was waterproof and dense, warmer than anything she had worn since she was brought to this hell. The silver direwolf sat slightly misaligned across her chest, held together by nothing but medical thread and her own stubborn refusal to die in a cage. Alpha Renard had treated her as nothing more than a walking blood bag, kept in the medical tent, bled for his soldiers, chained to a cot. Tonight, she was done being a resource. Her plan was simple and completely insane. She was going to walk straight through the frozen pine forest and surrender to the enemy. She was going to walk into the camp of Kalen Vance, the Alpha King of the Winter Claw, wearing his own colors. She left the compound through a gap in the rusted fence. She did not look back. The walk took 40 minutes. The ground was hard as concrete beneath her bare feet. Each step sent a shock of pain up her shins, but she counted them like a metronome. 100, 500, 1,000. Counting kept her moving. Stopping meant freezing. She reached 1,300 before the first flashlight beam cut through the dark. 3 Winter Claw scouts materialized from the tree line. They were in human form, armed, wearing the heavy slate-gray tactical gear of the King's forward unit. The tallest scout stopped mid-stride, his rifle raised instantly. Elara did not run. She did not cower. She simply stood in the blinding light, a starving girl wrapped in the stolen colors of their king, the crude stitches holding the direwolf together right over her heart. "Don't shoot," she said. Her voice was cracked from the cold, but entirely steady. "I need to see your alpha." The tall scout lowered his rifle a fraction of an inch. It was not enough to be safe, but enough to look at her properly. His eyes tracked from her bare, frost-bitten feet, up the rough medical stitches of the dress, to the direwolf crest, and finally to her face. He saw a girl who looked like a fragile bundle of twigs wrapped in stolen military wool. Her cheekbones were too sharp. Her lips were split and bleeding from the cold. But her eyes did not hold the frantic, shattered look of a beggar. "You are wearing the king's flag," the scout said. His voice was a dangerous mix of military discipline and primal offense. Elara did not lower her head. She gripped the edges of the heavy wool, feeling the crude suture thread pressing into her raw palms. "I had nothing else," she said, her voice dropping to a quiet rasp. "And I needed you to see me coming before your snipers did." The scout stared at her for a long second. He tapped his radio, murmuring a rapid, coded string of words. The response crackled back instantly. He gestured to the other 2 men. They did not bind her. They did not touch her. Instead, they formed a triangle around her, their weapons pointed outward into the dark trees, and began to walk her toward the main encampment. The walk tested the absolute limits of her endurance. But as they cleared the tree line, the Winterclaw camp came into view. It was nothing like the Ashfall compound. There was no smell of rust, rot, and permanent fear. This camp operated with cold, disciplined precision. She smelled burning hardwood. She smelled coffee. She smelled actual, fresh bread. The scent of food hit her starving stomach so violently she stumbled. The tall scout paused, glancing back at her, but she immediately righted herself. She would not fall, not here. They led her to the largest tent at the center of the camp. 2 massive guards flanked the entrance, their eyes glowing a faint amber warning in the shadows. The scout stepped forward. She walked through the eastern perimeter wearing the king's colors. She asked to see him. One of the guards looked at the stitched direwolf on her chest, his jaw tightening. He turned and slipped inside the tent. Elara stood in the freezing snow. Her toes had gone completely numb, a dangerous sign that the cold was winning. She closed her eyes, praying her legs would hold her for just 5 more minutes. Then, the heavy canvas flap was pushed open. A wave of heat rolled out, real, thick heat from a cast-iron stove. But beneath the warmth was something else. A physical pressure. It was an alpha aura so dense, so terrifyingly controlled, that it felt like gravity had suddenly doubled. It rolled over the snow, absolute and ancient. And deep inside Elara's chest, beneath the crescent scar hidden by her matted hair, something violently cracked. Her wolf, suffocated and silent for 6 brutal years, threw itself against her ribs with a desperate, frantic pulse. The guard stepped back, holding the canvas open. "Go in," he ordered. Elara stepped through the canvas flap. The heat hit her like a physical wall. It was not the damp, grudging warmth of a dying generator, but the deep, radiant heat of a heavy cast-iron field stove fed with solid hardwood. It rushed over her half-frozen skin so violently that her knees buckled. She caught herself, forcing her bare feet to plant firmly on the woven rug covering the dirt floor. She would not fall. The tent was bathed in the copper-gold light of oil lamps set across a large map table. And standing behind that table was Kaelin Vance. The stories told in the Ashfall compound said the Alpha King of the Winterclaw was a cold, ruthless warlord. The reality was something entirely different and far more dangerous. He was massive, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark gray tactical wool sweater with the sleeves pushed up to his forearms.
Yes, my lady.
A silver wolf head ring gleamed quietly on his right hand. His face was a landscape of sharp, aristocratic angles and battle-hardened lines.
Yes, my lady.
But it was his eyes that pinned her. Oh, the floor. They were icy blue, sharp as fractured glaciers, and they were locked directly onto the direwolf crest stitched across her chest. For a fraction of a second, the Alpha King's face darkened with absolute, terrifying authority. The sight of his kingdom's sacred standard torn, stained, and worn as a crude dress by a stranger was a profound insult. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. His nostrils flared. Elara watched the exact moment the Alpha King's legendary control shattered. It did not happen with a shout or a violent movement. It happened in absolute silence.
By the
The icy blue of his eyes violently dissolved, replaced by rings of molten, burning gold. A low sound vibrated in the tent. It was not a growl. It was a geological rumble, a vibration that started in his chest and resonated through the floorboards, making the oil lamps flicker.
I recognize
His wolf had slammed against the surface of his mind, recognizing what the man was struggling to process. Through the smell of burnt gunpowder, old blood, and damp wool on the flag, Kaelin caught her scent. Winter pine, crushed ferns, and the quiet, desperate pulse of a mate. The king's hands, braced flat against the map table, gripped the wood so hard the timber cracked. His knuckles went stark white. "Who did this to you?" His voice was a low, hoarse rasp. It was not a question of curiosity. It was a promise of devastation. Elara blinked, her frozen brain struggling to track his sudden shift in demeanor. She had expected to be interrogated, perhaps thrown into a holding cell. She had not expected the most feared alpha on the continent to look at her as if she were made of glass. "I am a prisoner of the Ashfall compound," Elara managed to say, her voice paper-thin but steady. "I took your flag from the eastern wire. I needed it to survive the snow." Kaelin stepped around the map table. He moved with a terrifying, coiled grace, entirely too fast for a man of his size. But as he approached her, he did not reach for his weapon. He did not issue a command. He stopped just 2 feet away, closing the distance so his massive frame effectively shielded her from the draft of the tent flap. The ambient heat radiating from his body was intoxicating. His golden eyes tracked downward, taking in the horrific details the scout's flashlight had only hinted at. He saw the dark, blooming bruises of iron shackles around her pale wrists. He saw the translucent frailty of her collarbones. He saw her bare, frost-bitten feet. And then, as she tilted her head to maintain eye contact, he saw it. Hidden just beneath her matted chestnut hair, slightly behind her left ear, was a scar. It was shaped like a perfect crescent moon. Kaelin's breath hitched. The golden fire in his eyes widened in sheer disbelief. "The Silver Court," he whispered, a sound filled with ancient reverence. He raised his hand. His fingers, calloused from war, were trembling slightly. Elara's body instinctively flinched, a conditioned response to 6 years of being struck. Kaelin froze instantly. He pulled his hand back a fraction, waiting, letting her see that he was not going to strike her.
It is the
Slowly, deliberately, he reached out again and brushed his thumb against the crescent scar. The moment his skin made contact with the mark, the world tore open. A blinding flash of silver light exploded behind Elara's eyes, the dark magic binding her wolf. The cruel suppression placed on her by Renard shattered like brittle glass under the sheer, fated weight of the Alpha King's touch. The sudden release of a power suppressed for 6 years was too much for her starving body. The tent spun. The pain in her feet vanished into a terrifying numbness. Elara's eyes rolled back, and the last thing she felt was the rough wool of the flag dress sliding against the king's sweater as Kaelin Vance caught her before she could hit the floor. Elara woke to a sensation she had not felt in over 2,000 days. Softness. She opened her heavy eyes, her heart immediately kicking into a panicked rhythm. She was lying on a military cot, but it was buried under thick, heavy down blankets. The brutal cold was gone. Across the room, the cast-iron stove radiated a steady, glowing heat. Beside her bed, carefully folded over the back of a wooden chair, was the torn winter claw flag dress. They had not thrown it away. They had saved it. She shifted, realizing she was wearing a clean, oversized cotton shirt. A silver-haired female physician stood quietly at the foot of the bed, packing away a medical kit. And standing in the shadows near the map table, perfectly still, was the Alpha King. Kaylin's eyes were locked on her face. The molten gold of his irises was muted in the dim light, but the intensity behind them was a physical weight.
Just rest.
"She is awake, sire," the physician said softly. Kaylin stepped forward. The sheer size of him made the spacious command tent feel incredibly small, but his movements were deliberate, slow, ensuring he did not startle her. "Report," Kaylin commanded, never taking his eyes off Elara. The physician did not flinch under the Alpha's heavy aura. She spoke with the calm, clinical detachment of someone who had seen war's worst atrocities. Severe malnutrition, multiple old fractures that healed improperly. The bruises on her wrists and the puncture marks on her arms indicate she was kept restrained and bled frequently. Her body has been surviving purely on the strength of her suppressed wolf. The physician paused. The silence in the tent thickened. "And," the physician added, her voice dropping a fraction, "she is approximately 7 weeks pregnant." Elara stopped breathing. The math crashed down on her like a collapsing ceiling. 7 weeks ago. The night after the Ashfall forces won the skirmish at Salt Creek. Beta Corin had come to the medical tent, reeking of cheap alcohol and adrenaline. She had fought. She always fought. But bound by iron and starved to the bone, she had lost. She had folded that memory into a tiny, dark box in her mind and nailed it shut just to survive. Now, the box was torn open.
You're safe here.
Elara looked at her trembling hands.
Thank you,
She braced herself. She was a broken thing, tainted by the blood of the enemy, carrying the seed of the man who had tortured her.
Safe here.
This was the moment the Alpha King would turn his back. This was where the fated mate bond would be rejected out of disgust. The cast-iron stove suddenly hissed. The flames inside guttered wildly, as if the oxygen had been violently sucked from the room. Elara looked up. Kaylin Vance had not moved, but the air around him was vibrating. The gold in his eyes was blazing, burning with a cold, architectural fury that was so vast it barely looked human.
Your presence here
His jaw
is
was locked so
unwelcome.
tight the muscles
Leave
trembled.
this place.
"Who?" It was one word. It was not a roar. It was delivered in a tone so
Your
low and
presence
flat,
here
it
is
sounded like
unwelcome.
bedrock grinding against
Leave
bedrock.
this place.
Elara swallowed the
I
dry lump in her
understand.
throat.
Tell me
She
what
did not
needs
look
to be
away.
done.
"Corin,"
The wound
she
is
whispered.
healing, Your
"Renard's
Majesty,
beta."
but you
Kaylin
must
closed his
rest.
eyes. He took a breath that lasted
understand.
5
Tell
long,
me what
agonizing
needs to be
seconds.
done.
When he opened them
The
again,
wound is
the
healing,
madness of
Your
his wolf had
Majesty,
been chained back,
but you
replaced
must
by the
rest.
calculating, lethal focus of a king. He walked to the side
You
of her
need to
cot.
rest.
He did not hover
You'll be
over
safe
her.
here.
He crouched down, bringing
Just
his
tell me
massive
what
frame to
happened.
eye level with her, so she would not have to look up. He rested
need
his
to
scarred
rest.
hands on his own knees,
safe
keeping
here.
them in plain sight, refusing to crowd
Just
her
tell me
space.
what happened.
"I am going to tell you something, Elara Thorne,"
I will not
Kaylin
let
said,
anything
his
happen
voice a
to
steady,
you.
grounding anchor in the storm of her mind. "And I need you to hear it as truth." Elara stared at him, her chest
I will
rising
not
and
let
falling
anything
rapidly.
happen to you.
"What was done to you is not your shame," Kaylin said. "It is my failure for not finding you sooner." The child you carry is yours.
Do not fear.
I do not care how
I
it
will
was
protect
conceived.
You from all
It is innocent,
harm
and it belongs
and
to
carry
you.
all your burdens.
He leaned forward slightly, the golden warmth in his eyes pressing into her fractured
Do not
soul.
fear.
I will protect you.
From all
I will
harm
protect the child,
and carry
and no
all
one
your
from that
burdens.
compound will ever lay a hand on you again. This is not a promise. It is the law of my court. A single tear broke free from Elara's lashes, tracking hotly down her pale cheek. For 6 years she had been a resource, a blood bag, a victim. And now the most terrifying warlord in the north was kneeling by her bed, offering to shield her entirely. She opened her mouth to speak, to thank him, to ask him why he would bear such a burden. Before she could form a word, the deafening crack of automatic gunfire ripped through the pre-dawn silence. The ground shuddered as a heavy mortar shell exploded somewhere near the perimeter. The canvas of the tent violently snapped. The tent, flap, was thrown open. The tall scout from the forest rushed in, his armor covered in snow and dirt. "Sire!" the scout shouted over the ringing gunfire. They bypassed the eastern ridge. Renard sent a flanking force through the southern tree line. 20 elite wolves. They are heading straight for the center of the camp.
The vanguard
The
to
scout
the
looked at
northern
Elara,
pass.
terror flashing in his eyes.
Now.
They know she is here. They came to take her back. The command tent erupted into
Deploy
motion.
the
Kalen's
vanguard
radio,
to the
sitting on the
northern
edge of the
pass.
map table, flared to life with a
Now.
burst of frantic static. "Command, this is Eastern Ridge. We have a massive breach. Heavy artillery. They are pushing the main line back."
Farewell, sister.
Kalen snatched the radio. The golden fire in his eyes had hardened into ice. "Hold the line, Commander. I am on my way."
Farewell, sister.
He turned back to the
Farewell,
tall
sister.
scout who had just entered. "The southern flank is a distraction to pull my forces away from the east, or an assassination squad meant for her." Kalen's
careful,
gaze
my
snapped to the
friend.
physician
We are
and the
counting
2
on
elite
you.
guards standing at the door. "No one enters this tent. You guard her with your lives."
Bar the gate.
He looked at Elara
Be
one
careful,
last
my
time.
friend.
It was
We
a
are
look that
counting
promised
on
he
you.
would tear the forest apart to return to her. "Stay here," he ordered gently. "Do not move." Then the Alpha King swept out of the tent, his massive silhouette disappearing into the falling snow. The sound of warfare escalated rapidly. The deep, concussive thuds of mortar fire shook the earth from the east. But beneath it, Elara's awakened senses picked up something else. A quiet, rhythmic crunching of snow. It was coming from the south, and it was moving fast. She sat on the edge of the cot, her hands instinctively coming to rest over her flat stomach. The child. The burden Kalen had so effortlessly claimed as his own to protect. If she stayed in this tent, the guards outside would die defending it. The physician would die. And if Renard's elite wolves breached the canvas, they would not take her alive. Alpha Renard knew exactly what she was now. If he could not use the Lunacourt air, he would erase her. Elara looked at the torn winterclaw flag draped over the wooden chair. For 6 years she had survived by keeping her head down, taking the pain, and hiding in the shadows. But she was no longer in the Ashfall compound. She had walked out of the dark. She would not be dragged back into it. Elara stood up. Her legs were shaky, but they held.
Open the flap.
She reached for a pair of thick wool socks and heavy leather boots left near the cot, slipping them onto her bruised feet. Then she picked up the flag dress. She pulled the dense, blood-stained military wool over her head, letting it settle over the clean cotton shirt. The crude stitches holding the dire wolf crest together sat heavy over her heart. It felt like armor.
Move aside, I
She
must
walked to
pass.
Kalen's map table.
We
Sitting
cannot
atop a
allow
stack
it.
of tactical reports was a heavy combat
path
dagger,
ends here,
7
emissary.
inches of blackened steel with a wolf carved into the
Move
hilt.
aside, I must
She picked it
pass.
up.
We
"My
cannot
lady, what are
allow
you
it.
doing?" the physician asked, her voice tight with alarm. "The king gave strict orders." "The king is defending his people," Elara said quietly. "I will not let his soldiers die for me in the dark." She bypassed the physician and pushed through the heavy canvas flap. The cold morning air hit her, thick with the smell of sulfur and pine. The 2 massive guards stationed outside immediately crossed their rifles in front of her, blocking her path. "You must stay inside," the guard on the left growled, his amber eyes flashing. Elara looked up at him. She did not raise her voice. She did not beg. She simply looked directly into his eyes, and deep within her chest, the ancient, suppressed bloodline of the Silver Court flared. Her dark brown eyes shifted, flooded with veins of lumen, ooze silver. "Step aside," Elara commanded. It was a quiet whisper, but it hit the guard like a physical blow to the chest. The ancient authority in her voice bypassed his conscious mind and spoke directly to his primal instincts. The guard gasped, his arms dropping instantly. He took a stumbling step back, his head bowing entirely against his own will. Elara walked past them, gripping the dagger tightly, and headed straight for the southern perimeter. The camp was in controlled chaos. Soldiers were running toward the eastern front, shouting orders over the roar of distant explosions. No one noticed the fragile woman in the torn flag dress walking in the opposite direction. She reached the southern edge of the camp just as the sky began to bleed a pale, bruised purple. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets. She stood alone in the clearing, the cold wind whipping the heavy wool of the flag around her legs. She took a deep breath, letting her scent, the scent that Renard had tried to bury, the scent that belonged to a true queen, drift freely into the freezing wind. "Come and get me," she thought. The tree line 30 yards ahead suddenly shuddered. The shadows between the pines broke apart. One by one, massive wolves stepped out of the tree line. They were built for slaughter, their fur matted with snow, their jaws dripping with feral anticipation. Renard's elite hunters, 20 of them. They fanned out, forming a deadly crescent to trap him against the camp. The largest wolf in the center, a heavily scarred gray beast, locked its eyes on the lone woman standing in the snow. Elara did not run. She stood her ground, her grip tightening on the black steel dagger, waiting for the charge. The gray wolf at the center of the formation broke into a dead sprint. It closed the distance in seconds, kicking up plumes of white snow. The rest of the pack followed, a silent, coordinated wave of teeth and muscle, designed to tear their target apart before she could even scream. Elara raised the heavy combat dagger. Her hands were shaking, her pregnant body running on fumes, but she braced her boots against the frozen earth. The gray wolf lunged, jaws snapping open for her throat. Time seemed to fracture. At that exact moment, the crescent scar behind Elara's left ear did not just warm, it caught fire. A searing, brilliant heat flooded her skull, rushing down her spine and violently rewiring her nervous system. The suppression binding that Kalen had cracked in the tent completely shattered. Elara's vision washed out in a blinding wave of silver. The quiet, suppressed wolf inside her chest expanded, unfurling into something vast and ancient. It was not the submissive spirit of an Omega. It was a queen rising from a centuries-long slumber. Elara opened her mouth, and the sound that came out was not a scream. Down. The single word did not just cut through the howling wind. It hit the charging wolves like a physical shockwave. It was the Lunar Command, an ability hunted to extinction by corrupt alphas, a voice that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the neurological pack bond of any wolf within hearing distance. The gray wolf, suspended mid-leap, suddenly spasmed. Its eyes rolled back, and it crashed heavily into the snow at Elara's feet, its limbs locking in absolute involuntary submission. Behind it, 12 other wolves collapsed instantly. They hit the frozen ground, whining in a mixture of terror and awe, their bodies pressed flat against the earth, physically incapable of defying the bloodline of the Silver Court. But 7 of Renard's elites, the most heavily conditioned, brutalized killers, pushed through the crushing weight of her command. Their eyes bled from the effort of fighting the ancient authority, driven by sheer, desperate madness. One of them lunged from her blind spot. Elara twisted, bringing the dagger up, but she was a fraction too slow. The wolf's teeth clamped down on her forearm, tearing through the heavy wool sleeve of the flag dress. A sharp line of pain flared across her skin, and a thin streak of blood soaked into the gray wool. Before the wolf could lock its jaw and crush her bone, a massive shadow blotted out the falling snow. A beast the size of a warhorse slammed into the attacking wolf with the force of a free ite train. The impact sounded like cracking thunder. The enemy wolf was thrown 30 feet through the air, landing motionless in the snowdrifts. Elara staggered back, clutching her bleeding arm. Standing over her, shielding her entirely from the remaining attackers, was a black dire wolf. His fur was the color of midnight, his fangs bared, and his eyes burned with that unmistakable molten gold fire. Kaelin. The Alpha King did not slaughter the remaining 6 wolves. He did not need to. The growl that ripped from his chest vibrated through the frozen bedrock of the earth. It was a sound that promised the end of the world.
Yes, we did.
The sheer oppressive weight of the Winterclaw King's aura, combined with the lingering absolute authority of the White Queen's command, completely broke them.
Did it.
The remaining wolves shifted back to their human forms mid-stride, an act of ultimate, humiliating surrender. They fell to their knees in the snow, pressing their foreheads to the dirt, trembling violently. The clearing fell dead silent, save for the howling wind. Kaelin did not pursue them. His massive direwolf form shimmered and shrank, shifting back into the Alpha King in the blink of an eye. He was on his knees before her in seconds, heedless of the freezing snow soaking through his tactical pants. His golden eyes were wide, frantic as they locked onto the torn sleeve of the flag dress and the blood on her arm. "I told you to stay," Kaelin breathed, his voice wrecked, completely devoid of its usual cold control. "I don't stay well," Elara rasped, her silver-veined eyes slowly fading back to their warm, dark brown. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her swaying on her feet. Kaelin reached out, his large hands incredibly gentle as he gripped her arm. He tore a clean strip of fabric from the hem of his own sweater and quickly bound the shallow bite wound. "You used the Lunar Command," he said, looking up at her face. The reverence in his eyes was staggering. "I felt it from the eastern ridge. Every wolf in this camp felt it." He tied off the makeshift bandage, his jaw hardening into a sharp line of absolute resolve. "No one will ever hunt you again," Kaelin vowed, pulling her against his chest, letting his heavy coat shield her from the biting wind. By noon today, the Ashfall compound will be nothing but ash. Ashfall fell before noon. Kaelin Vance kept his word. The Winterclaw forces swept through the eastern compound, not with chaotic violence, but with the cold, systematic precision of an avalanche. Most of Renard's garrison, having felt the distant echo of the Lunar Command that morning, simply dropped their weapons and knelt in the snow. By 3 in the afternoon, the leaders of the Ashfall compound were brought into the center of the Winterclaw camp. Elara stood in the clearing, the falling snow having finally stopped. She wore the torn winter claw flag. The blood from the morning's attack had been washed from her arm by the physician, replaced by a clean white bandage, but the crude suture stitches holding the direwolf crest together remained untouched. She did not stand behind the Alpha King. She stood at his side. The heavy sound of iron boots and dragging chains broke the quiet of the camp. Alpha Renard and Beta Corin were marched into the clearing, their wrists bound in silver-laced heavy shackles. Renard's face was bruised, his armor cracked, but he still carried the stubborn, arrogant posture of a man who believed the world owed him obedience. Then his eyes locked onto Elara. Renard stopped walking. The guards shoved him forward, forcing him to his knees in the freezing mud 10 feet away from her. His gaze tracked from her clean face down to the Winterclaw colors draped over her frail body, and finally to the Alpha King standing beside her like a towering wall of black steel.
Is the Queen prepared?
The recognition hit Renard late, but it hit him hard. The Omega he had bled for 6 years was the very thing the Winterclaw King had been tearing the continent apart to find.
Yes,
"You look different," Renard sneered, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his terror. "I am different," Elara replied. Her voice was calm, carrying none of the fear that had once defined her existence in his cages. Beside Renard, Beta Corin struggled against his chains. He was a broad, heavy man, his eyes flat and cruel. He looked at Elara, not with recognition, but with the blank, empty stare of a predator assessing a lost meal. This was the man who had forced his way into the medical tent. This was the father of the child growing inside her. Elara's breath hitched, a phantom pain tightening her ribs. Kaelin felt the shift in her pulse through the mate bond. The Alpha King stepped forward, and the ambient temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 20 degrees. The silence that fell over the Winterclaw soldiers was absolute. Every wolf present could feel the crushing, suffocating weight of their king's aura. Kaelin looked down at Corin. His eyes were not icy blue. They were a solid, molten gold, burning with a rage so profound it defied human expression. "You touched my mate," Kaelin said. The words were quiet, but they resonated like a death knell across the frozen earth.
I am with
Corin's
you.
bravado finally faltered. His wolf recognized the apex predator standing before him, and the beta began to shake, pulling desperately against the silver chains. "Alpha," Corin gasped, looking toward Renard for salvation that would never come. "Death is mercy," Kaelin stated, his voice devoid of any inflection. "Death is a fast end for a coward. You will not have it." Kaelin did not draw his sword. He did not raise his hand. He simply unleashed the full, unbridled authority of the Winterclaw King upon the kneeling beta. 1. It was the Omega stripping, the most severe, archaic punishment in pack law. It was not a physical mutilation, but a violent, targeted destruction of the neural pathways that connected a wolf to the pack network. Corin screamed. It was a horrific sound, a howl that started human and ended as something hollow and broken. The invisible tether that bound his soul to the collective consciousness of his wolf was brutally severed by the king's sheer authority. Corin collapsed into the mud, curling into a fetal position, weeping openly. He was entirely alone in his own mind, a shell left to wander in absolute silence. The Winterclaw soldiers looked on in stoic reverence, recognizing the sheer gravity of a king who used the ancient laws to exact flawless
The time
justice.
is upon us.
Kalen turned his
Stand
golden
ready,
eyes to Alpha
For
Renard.
the path forward
Renard was
is
trembling
clear.
now, his arrogance completely shattered by the display of power.
The
He braced
time is
himself for
upon
his
us.
own execution.
Stand ready.
"I want him to
For
live,"
the path
Elara
forward
said
is
suddenly,
clear.
her voice cutting through the heavy silence. Kalen looked at her, waiting. Elara stepped closer to the kneeling, broken Alpha. "I want him to sit in a cell, and when the pack officially recognizes me tonight, I want him kneeling at the edge of the firelight. I want him to watch me become everything he tried to destroy." Kalen's expression softened as he looked at his true mate. The absolute dignity radiating from her frail frame was more commanding than any army. "As my queen commands," Kalen said softly. He signaled the guards. "Take them away, and prepare the center ring. At dusk, we recognize the true Luna." The recognition ceremony was held at dusk.
You came
Hundreds
back.
of Winterclaw soldiers assembled in the clearing at the center of the camp. They stood in perfectly disciplined concentric circles around a raised platform of packed earth and flat
You came
stones.
back.
Iron brackets held burning torches, throwing wavering orange light that mixed with the descending
promised.
blue-gray of the winter twilight. The air smelled of pine smoke, cold earth, and the electric, charged anticipation of a pack preparing to welcome their Luna. At the edge of the firelight, kneeling in the snow with heavy silver chains biting into his wrists, was Alpha Renard. 2 massive guards stood over him. His bruised face was turned toward the platform, forced to watch the culmination of his own ruin. Inside the command tent, the silver-haired physician had offered Elara 3 different garments, beautiful, pristine dresses made of heavy velvet and soft cotton, brought from the king's private stores. Elara had looked at them, tracing the fine embroidery, and then she had politely pushed them aside. She reached for the torn Winterclaw flag. "My lady," the physician had said gently, "you do not have to wear the blood of the battlefield tonight." "Yes, I do," Elara had replied, pulling the heavy wool over her head. "This is what I was wearing when I walked out of the dark. This is what I will be wearing when I step into the light." Now she stood at the base of the stone platform. The crude suture stitches holding the silver direwolf crest together sat proudly across her chest. She was barefoot no longer, wearing warm leather boots, and the bite wound on her arm was neatly bandaged beneath the torn sleeve.
You are safe.
Kalen Vance stood at the center of the platform. In the torchlight, he looked less like a man and more like a primordial force of nature. He wore a dark, formal military coat, but no crown. He did not need one. The absolute authority radiating from him was a physical weight that pressed over the entire clearing. His golden eyes found her in the crowd.
We stand united.
The ambient noise of the camp instantly died away. Kalen did not make a grand speech. He was a king of action, not empty words. He extended his
stand
scarred hand
united.
toward her and spoke 4 words that carried to the farthest edges of the forest. "Elara Thorn, come forward." Elara stepped onto the platform. She did not lower her head. She walked with a quiet, undeniable grace that belonged to a lineage older than anyone standing in the snow. She stopped in front of him. The mate bond hummed between them, so potent and visible it made the torchlight shimmer like a heat haze. Kaelin looked down at the stitched flag draped over her frail, pregnant body. He saw her survival. He saw her unyielding dignity. He saw the mother of a child he would raise as his own, simply because it belonged to her. He lifted his hand and gently brushed her dark chestnut hair away from her neck. His thumb traced the crescent scar behind her ear. "I claim your past," Kaelin whispered, his voice for her ears alone, deep and rumbling with absolute devotion. "I claim your burdens. I claim your enemies as my own." He leaned down. Elara tilted her head, not in submission, but in an open, fearless invitation. Kaelin's teeth broke the skin at the junction of her neck and shoulder. The marking bite burned like a brand, but it healed instantly like a sacred promise. The bond between them solidified with a low, harmonic vibration that every wolf in the clearing felt in their marrow. The ancient suppression was permanently erased, replaced by the unbreakable shield of the Winter Claw King. Kaelin lifted his head. He looked into her eyes, watching the warm brown irises briefly flash with the silver light of the Luna court. Then, Kaelin Vance, the most feared warlord in the north, turned to his army and bowed his head to the woman beside him. The pack howled.
Thank you.
It was not a synchronized, formal military salute. It was a ragged, genuine, earth-shaking roar that tore from the throats of hundreds of wolves.
Thank you.
It rose into the darkening sky, echoing across the mountains, a declaration that the true Luna had been found. At the edge of the circle, Alpha Renard wept in his chains. He watched the Omega he had treated as a blood bag stand above him, untouchable, wrapped in the colors of the king who had destroyed him. The realization of what he had thrown away and what he had awakened finally broke his mind.
Yes.
Hours later, the camp was quiet. Inside the warm command tent, the cast-iron stove ticked as the metal expanded. The oil lamps burned low, casting long golden shadows across the canvas walls. The torn flag dress was draped over the wooden chair, the silver direwolf crest gleaming in the dim light.
I will
Elara
never
lay in
let
the
you
heavy
go.
down blankets, her head resting on Kaelin's broad chest.
You are
His
the
arm
most
was wrapped
precious
securely
thing in
around
my
her,
life.
his large hand resting protectively
I will
over her
never
stomach.
let you go.
His heartbeat was a slow, steady drum beneath her ear, the sound of home. "When I walked into your checkpoint wearing your flag," Elara murmured into the dark, "what did you think?" Kaelin's chest rumbled with a quiet, breathless laugh. His fingers gently stroked her arm. "I thought a ghost had stolen my colors," he said softly. "I thought I was going to have to execute
I
a
found
spy."
it.
He paused,
It
pressing a
bows to me
kiss to the
now.
top of her head. "And then I
Yes, it
smelled
does.
you, and I knew the war was
Rest.
finally over."
I found
Elara closed her eyes,
It
sinking
bows
into
to
the
me now.
impossible warmth of his embrace. She had
Yes,
walked
it
into the
does.
freezing snow expecting to die.
rest.
Instead, she had found a king who was strong enough to carry her burdens, and a kingdom that bowed to the truth of her blood. She was no longer a prisoner. She was the queen in the flag. A true queen is not made by a crown. She is revealed by the dignity no one could take from her. Would you have had the courage to wear the enemy's flag into the freezing snow to survive? If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional tales of protective alpha kings, hidden truths, and queens rising from pain. Stay with us for the next one.